Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about my third great grandmother Diana Ray, who was born in St Cyrus in 1811 and who died there in 1895. I started out my journey looking at my family history after I retired and moved to the centre of France. So everything I've discovered it online. So I'm only showing you resources today that I've used online. This map, like many other wonderful maps, is available to look at the National Library of Scotland. This one here is by Herman Moll and was published in 1724. I particularly like this map because in the bottom right hand corner there's an image of Montrose, and that's where my story will begin. The blue dot on the map indicates where we'll be today across three parishes: St Cyrus in Kincardineshire, Montrose in Angus, and Edzell in Angus. And here is that illustration of Montrose. Now, when the map was created in 1724, there would have been about 3,000 souls living in Montrose, and it relied heavily on shipping. They did a lot of trade with the Baltic, which they had done from the 1400s. Now, my story really starts in Montrose because my father was born, Frederick James Jolly, in Montrose in 1930, and this is him here in the photo. Not the baby's me. This is my mum and dad and me on my christening day. Now, my mother wasn't born in Montrose. She was born in Dundee, which is about 30 miles or so south of Montrose. But she had a grandmother who lived in Montrose, and at the weekend, in the summer, she would cycle up to Montrose and stay with her gran for the weekend, and that's where she met my father. This is an aerial photo of Montrose from the website Britain from Above. All the images are high definition and have been taken all over Britain since 1919. The website is well worth a look at. In this image here, at the top of the screen, you'll see the North Sea, and then the Montrose beaches and the Montrose golf course. At the bottom of the screen is the Montrose Basin, which is now a nature reserve. You'll also see in the bottom right-hand corner the railway bridge and the old road bridge that my mother used to cycle over into Montrose. I've zoomed in on that image and you can just about see in the middle the steeple, and across from the steeple are a group of houses on the high street, and in one of those houses lived my mother's grandmother. And at the top of the screen you'll see lots of trees that form a long park, and in front of those trees is Baltic Street, and that's where my father was born into and grew up. This photo was taken in about 1937 in the park that you saw on the slide previously. The wee boy is my father's younger brother, David Wilson Jolly, and stood behind him is my grandfather, Frederick Jolly. And my dad, who's about 7, is standing in front of his mother, Annie Wilson Ferren. Now, my grandfather, Frederick Jolly, was born in Edzell in 1905 to David Jolly, who was a mason, and Janet Henry Johnson. Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of my great-grandfather, David Jolly, who was born in Montrose in 1872. And if you remember from the previous slide, was down as a mason on his son's birth certificate. Now, when I was little, we had a series of Reliant Robin cars, if you could call them cars. This is, I think, early 60s or 64 maybe. Anyways, we used to run up and down from Dundee to Montrose most weekends, and often via Edzell. And every time we went through Edzell and under that Dalhousie arch, my father would say, his grandfather built that arch. Well, you know, when you're doing family history, sometimes you just unravel these stories. And actually, when that arch was completed, David Jolly was only 14, still living in Montrose with his parents. And even much later, in 1891, he was still in Montrose working in a flax factory. So I don't really think he was involved with the building of the arch. Now, David's parents were William Jolly, who at the time of David's birth was also working in a factory, and his mother was Davidina Jolly, née Tom, who we'll meet next. These are David's parents, William Jolly, born in 1843 in Fitzcyrus, which is about 5 miles from Montrose in the county of Kincardineshire, and Davidina Tom. Now, when William Jolly died in 1916, on his death certificate seen here, his father is listed as David Jolly, shipmaster, and his mother is down as Diana Ray. So we finally get to meet Diana Ray, who was William's mother. Before we get to meet Diana Ray, I thought I'd show you how I organise my files for each pair of grandparents. This is for couple number 16 and 17, which is William Jolly and Davidina Tom. Inside the folder is another folder which contains all the census documents I have for that couple, and then there's a folder for all their children's documentation, and then at the top level is all their information, including a family sheet which I complete for each couple that shows all their children with all their children's vital documents in there as well. So for the census folder here, you can see I've got actually 8 documents for this couple, because in 1901 William is actually away at sea, so I have him on a shipping census and Davidina back in Montrose. And the first census I pick up William is in 1851. So we're back to 1851, and here's where we get to meet Diana Ray. Down on the census is Diana Jolly, already a widow at age 36, but still showing as a captain seaman's wife, born St. Cyrus. She has her 3 children with her: Margaret, the oldest, born in Montrose, then William, as we know, born in St. Cyrus, and the youngest child, David, born in St. Cyrus. He's showing age 3 here. And at the bottom, which is a bit of a bonus, is Margaret McBay, also a widow and Diana Ray's mother. So Margaret McBay helps to establish the fact that the old parish register I have for Diana Ray for 1811, which shows William Ray and Margaret McBay as the parents, is the correct one. This is Margaret Jolly's folder, and you see there are 2 birth registers. The first one is from Montrose in 1841, which is the one I expected to find, and then there's another one from St. Cyrus in 1842. The one from Montrose, which is the one with the beautiful writing at the bottom, reads, David Jolly, mariner, and Diana Ray, his spouse, had a daughter born on the 10th of December 1841 and baptised the 29th of December 1841, named Margaret. However, the one from St. Cyrus from 1842, which I thought might have been another child a year later, was in fact the same daughter. It reads, David Jolly and Diana Ray at Montrose had a daughter born the 3rd and baptised the 5th of January 1842, named Margaret. Well, it's the same Margaret, but the dates are wrong. Margaret proved useful in flagging up the fact that her father was indeed a captain, because when she married in 1864, Francis Moncar, the marriage announcement appeared in the Dundee Advertiser, and in it it refers to Margaret, only daughter of the late Captain D. Jolly Montrose. When I was trying to find all the children of Diana Ray's on the census going forward, I couldn't find David Jolly in 1861. He would have been about 13 years old. So I did assume at one point that he had died before statutory records began in 1855. His sister, Margaret, was still living in St Cyrus in 1861 with her granny, Margaret McBee, down here as Margaret Ray. And William Jolly, I already knew, was working as a ploughman over in Logie Park in Angus. David wasn't with his mother in 1861 because she'd remarried, and she's over at Inverkeithler in Angus, living with her new husband, George Nichol, who was 65 years old, and his children, the oldest being 37, and Diana Ray, who was by this time 42. Still no sign of David. In 1837, Diana Ray had married David Jolly in St Cyrus, and we know by 1851 she was a widow. Then in 1857, in St Cyrus, she married George Nichol. Now, this marriage presents me with a little puzzle I've never been able to solve. On the marriage certificate, one of the witnesses is down as a Robert Ray. Now, I know Diana had a brother called Robert Ray, born and baptized in 1819, but I've never been able to find him on any census or in any other documentation. By 1871, Diana, now Nichol, was showing as a widow, so I had to find George Nichol's death certificate. So I found what I thought was his death certificate, showing aged 72, dying in St Cyrus, but there's no mention of a widow, there's no relative signing as the informant, there are no parents listed. The only thing that I have for a clue is he died of accidental drowning in the Mill Dam at Berryhillock in the parish of St Cyrus. Well, I thought I would check the newspapers, and sure enough, there was a report in the Dundee Advertiser, death by drowning of Mr. George Nichol, farmer. Mr. George Nichol, farmer, Berryhillock, ties in with the death certificate, in this parish, and lately farmer Hodgkin in the parish of Inverkeithler. Definitely my man. It goes on to say he was found by his two stepsons about 7 o'clock. Well, two stepsons, that meant to me that David, the missing David from the 1861 census, was indeed alive. Then I found another newspaper item, which was concerning the sale of the stock and the implements at the farm, and it names both William and David Jolly as the outgoing tenants. And at the bottom you can see it's Batchelor and McConaughey auctioneers for Berryhillock. And the auction was to take place on October the 31st, 1867. So not too long after George's death in August. From the information on George Nichol's death, I knew that David Jolly was still alive, so I eventually found him on a 1871 census in Durham, in the northeast of England. And I also found he had married in 1871 a woman called Margaret Saunders. Now, when I went to look for the pair in 1881, I could only find Margaret. By that time, she was showing as a widow with 5 children under the age of 10. Now, her oldest child was down as a Diana R. Jolly, aged 9. So when I checked the births for Jollies and a Diana in June 1871 in Sunderland, there was a Diana Ray Jolly born so I was pretty confident I had the correct family. But where was David? Well, in 1880, also in Sunderland, there's a David Jolly who dies at age 32, which would be spot on age for David Jolly. So I'm confident that this is him and this is his family. When George Nicol died, there was a will to be found, and it proved very useful. It does mention Diana Ray's former husband, David Jolly, shipmaster, Montrose. It also mentions the 3 children of that marriage, Margaret, William and David. And up here it says that in the course of our courtship and before our marriage it was arranged and agreed upon between myself and my said wife that upon my death I should make a provision to her and her said children of the sum of £500 sterling in consideration of the loss sustained by her of said annuity and surrender of the movable property which fell to me on the occasion of our marriage. I'll return to Diana Ray and her property in a little while, but first of all I want to go back in time to 1841. On the census in St. Cyrus, William Ray, Diana's father, and Margaret Ray, her mother, have 2 children in the household with them. One is called John Hood and the other is called William Ray. Now I don't know who William Ray is, but I now know who John Hood is, because in the old parish register for St. Cyrus there is a baptism in 1831 and it's under Hood, and it reads, John Hood and Diana Ray at Milton had a son in fornication, baptized, named John. So Diana Ray had had a child before she married David Jolly. When I went to look for John Hood in 1851, quelle surprise, I couldn't find him anywhere. I finally found John Hood in the Merchant Seaman records at Find My Past. And you can see from this record, it says he was born at St. Cyrus in 1831 and he was signed up, he was ticketed at age 15, and the poor wee lad is only 5 foot 2.5 inches tall. So he went to sea as an apprentice in the year 1846. And you'll see from his record there are only 2 years filled in, 1846 when he started and 1 year after. And in tiny little writing, in the year 47, it says lost, which means he was lost at sea in 1847. So he joined up in 1846 and he was lost at sea in 1847. The other thing that's important in this record is the number 127 is listed here and here, and that will be important in the next slide. As we know from the Merchant Seaman records that Find My Past, John Hood was lost at sea in 1847. Now to the right on the screen it says Montrose Shipping from the Scottish Post Office Directory of 1847, and at the bottom the vessel Countess of Airlie is mentioned and the master is listed as a Jolly. Now I followed this ship in the shipping news in the newspapers, and it made multiple journeys with Jolly as the captain from Montrose to Riga and back. However, this ship is nowhere to be found after November the 3rd. From the Aberdeen Journal it reads, great anxiety begins to be felt for the fate of the brigantine Countess of Airlie of this port. The vessel was reported to be at Elsinore on the 4th current from Riga to London with a cargo of wheat, and since then no tidings have reached this place regarding her, from the Montrose Review. So it looks like the Countess of Airlie was lost in November 1847, or around about that time. Now, the important thing about that 127 is it also appears in David Jolly's listing, and this indicates that they were both on the same boat at the same time. So I suspect both David Jolly and John Hood went down on the Countess of Airlie in the autumn of 1847. There is no mention ever again of the ship after that mention in the Aberdeen Journal. From George Nichol's will, we know upon marriage Diana had to give up her annuity and her movable property, but it looks like she held on to her house in St. Cyrus. In the top snip, you can see that she has a house in Woodston, and she's down at that time as Mrs. Diana Jolly. That was before she married George. In 1865, after she'd married George and before his death, she's still down as the proprietor of a dwelling house at Woodston Lands of Southall in St. Cyrus. And ditto for 86, 87 and 95. She's listed there as Mrs. Diana Nichol, proprietor, house, etc. Woodstone. So I presume she managed to hold on to her house. Over the next few slides, you'll see some images of St. Cyrus, which really is a beautiful place, and the last three census that Diana Ray appears on. This one in 1871 is not long after she's made a widow with George Nichol's death. She's living in Kirktown, which is another name for the village, with her grandson Robert, who's down here as Nichol, but whose real name is Robert Jolly. Diana is working as a grocer, and Robert's still a scholar as he's only age 8. Below Diana is numerated Francis Moncur, who is her son-in-law, and then her daughter Margaret and 3 more grandchildren, George, Margaret and James. You'll notice at the end of the census column, it says rooms with 1 or more windows, and Diana has 3. And on every census, Diana has 3. So I do think it's the same house that she lives in continuously. In this slide, we're looking south to Montrose, and I wonder how often Diana stood on the cliffs at St. Cyrus and looked in that direction. That was the last port her husband and her son sailed out of. Anyways, this is 1881, and she still has her grandson with her, Robert Jolly, who's now 18 and working as a general labourer. She's also still working as a grocer. We're now at the foot of the cliffs in St. Cyrus, and with the last census we'll find Diana on. She's no longer working as a grocer. She's now listed as a farmer's widow, and she's on her own. Diana dies in 1895, and her parents, unsurprisingly, are listed as William Ray and Margaret McBee. She lives to 84 years old, and her grandson, Margaret's son, William Moncur, signs her death certificate. And nowhere on her death certificate does it mention Captain David Jolly. It just states widow of George Nichol, farmer. Now, I normally don't do gravestones, but we were at the nature reserve at St. Cyrus, so it was only a few steps really to the Kirk graveyard in St. Cyrus. And to be honest, I was looking for something that would indicate that a Captain David Jolly had died at some point in time. But alas, nothing to be found until I stumbled upon this grave. Now, I knew the background of Diana by then, so Had I not, I would have just walked past this. So this was erected by Diana's granddaughter in memory of her mother, who was Margaret Jolly, who married Francis Moncur, and her grandmother, Diana Ray, who married first David Jolly, then George Nicol. Now, I was going to end this presentation with Diana Ray's death, but there are a couple of resources I wanted to point out. One is the usefulness of outline maps, county outline maps, which show the parishes. Now, there are almost 900 parishes in Scotland, and you really need to know your parish inside out when you're doing family history. So, outline maps, very useful. The other thing that I find invaluable are the old statistical accounts. Now, they were all written by the ministers, so you have to be a bit wary of what's written, but even so, they are very useful. There's the old statistical account, which was put together between 1791 and 1799, and the new statistical account, which was put together in the 1840s. Now, the one for St. Cyrus, the old statistical account for St. Cyrus, is particularly good. It runs to 35 pages, and you can download it like all the others. The minister outlines the economy of the parish, the ecclesiastical state of the parish, the lay of the land. He talks about the flowers and the trees and how much barley is produced. It's just wonderful. In this little snip from the old statistical account for St. Cyrus, he talks about the women and how excellent they are at spinning, and how they can spin 2 threads at once with the greatest facility. Then he goes on to tell us how much they can make in a week from their spinning activity. The only thing you need to get used to in the old statistical account is the fact that they use an old typeface that looks like an F for the letter S. So that's spindles of coarse yarn are spun. So, but that's the only thing you need to get used to. They are really useful, and I thoroughly recommend you download them for the parishes that you're working in. So I'll leave you there. I hope that was of use to some people.